Good morning. Good morning.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Morning Deuce. It's Friday. That means it's Interview Fridays. We have two guests for you. The first one, Martin Shkreli, is on the podcast. That's a little weird to say because I'm not exactly sure he knew. Well, I know for a fact he did not know he was going to be on the podcast. For those of you who don't know who Martin Shkreli is, you probably should because he was plastered all over the internet and television media for a good 2-week span. At the end of 2015. He is a CEO of a pharmaceutical company called Turing Pharmaceuticals. He stepped down then. But what everyone freaked out about was he bought the license to a drug called Daraprim. And basically what the drug did is it was used to treat a virus, like an illness, that most people who have HIV get. It's associated with HIV. So if you have it, it's usually a secondary sickness you get, and it's used to treat that. And he raised the price by more than 5,500%. So the pill was $13 and change when he got it, and he raised it to $750 a pill. People were not happy. The world freaked out. The media freaked out. There were congressional hearings. He's since been indicted for something else. People were not happy with Martin Shkreli. And I'll admit, I basically thought he was a terrible person right off the bat as well. And his demeanor and everything, you got to think maybe, he seemed like someone who didn't present themselves with a lot of concern at all. But he put his cell phone number last night on Twitter and live streamed like an AMA type thing and Ask Me Anything, where you could call in and talk to him about anything. So eventually I called in. But while I was kind of waiting on the calling, and we'll get to that, he kind of explained a lot of different things that I hadn't thought about or learned. And it actually made me realize I should probably look into this deeper to get a better formed opinion. But basically what he talked about, some of it was just like, the fact that the way the system is sort of set up is, he's running a business. And so, you have to make money where there's an opportunity to do so, sort of. But a lot of it actually, someone called in and was like, how could you do that? People were dying. People who had HIV, they weren't getting their medicine. They were dying. How could you do that to people? But what he explained was, the insurance basically pays for it. The people don't. And then the person, well, what about all the people who are uninsured who still need your medication? And what Shkreli explained was that not a single person who ever needed or wanted the medication didn't get it. They didn't deny anyone the medication. They've never denied anyone the medication, and no one has died because they didn't get the medication. 70% of the people who are supposed to get the medication, who are prescribed it, don't have insurance. So the pricing has to be really expensive for the other 30% to pay for the fact that 70% are still getting it for free or subsidized a ton. That has to be covered by the other 30% if you're going to make some type of profit off the pill or in general. So no one ever didn't get it. The other thing that he talked about was that Daraprim, I guess, is a medicine that has been treating something for 70 years, and I don't think it's unbelievably effective. And again, this is just what he said. But what basically, because it's low profit and sells for so low money, there's no real incentive for research to be done to create another more medicine to better treat the disease or the virus or whatever. But by raising the price of the product, you actually create a market where other people want to create a better drug that they can sell for cheaper. There's incentive to do it, to compete, where people get better medication because now there's an incentive to create a drug in that market. So raising the price reopens the market for people to compete and incentivizes people to compete to create drugs that do what Daraprim does, but better. And that was an interesting angle I hadn't heard of. It definitely made me want to look into it a little deeper. My jury is still out, but I do think we all kind of just dug into the couple headlines and like the media throw at it, where I don't know a ton about the industry. And I do know that we've created this sort of interesting thing where there's not a lot of manufacturing rights for a certain amount of medicines. So because we've limited the amount of supply, and if you're in the U.S., you can only get them in the U.S., you can't go outside the country to get the medication. You have to go to the limited supply. And because the supply is limited and the demand is more, we've created sort of an artificial non-free market system for medical drugs. And that's why they can be priced so expensively. And yet we kind of allow that to go on. So let me say that he put his cell phone online, and I decided to call him, and I wanted to ask him a question. But the first time I called him, I used a weird accent. I don't know exactly why I used a weird accent. I kind of regret it. But I used a weird accent, I think, so that I would like stand out and hopefully get to talk on the phone a little bit more. But it ended up being weirdly weird. I also left him a voicemail. But finally he picked up, and I was at work. I had someone record it for me. So this is my first attempt to contact Mr. Shkreli, who literally just put his cell phone on the internet and said, I'm answering questions, live streaming it, call, whatever you want to say. So this was our first interaction.
Martin Shkreli.
Hey, Marty, it's your boy D-Spin. I got a question. You know how Bernie Sanders put those women from Vermont on a bus and then drove them to Canada to get those cheaper cancer products?
He hung up on me.
What the fuck, Martin?
I was trying to ask you an intellectual question.
He fucking hung up on you.
That's some bullshit. Did they do it?
So there was our first attempt to talk to Mr. Martin Shkreli, or as I called him with my weird accent, Matty. That's my Massachusetts Matty. It wasn't that he hung up on me. The software like cut out because the whole live serve, the webcast just went black when I talked to him after he said Martin Shkreli. It went black. I think he was getting too many phone calls to his phone because he didn't actively hang up because someone else was listening to the webcast in the room. So I know what you thought, like, oh, you know, a normal man just gives up under that circumstances, but not I. I was determined to get Martin Shkreli on the phone. So while at work, while doing my job, I had speakerphone on my phone, and I called the number repeatedly over and over and over again. I called 143 times and also 6 times accidentally called using FaceTime audio. So I called 149 times Martin Shkreli's phone number over probably 50 minutes to an hour. Just click, call, click, call, click, call, click, call while I was working until finally Mr. Shkreli picked up. And I wanted to ask him about how like borders impact drug prices. But I also didn't want to be lame right off the bat. So this is what we got.
I have 2 good questions. One's intellectual and one's a little off the wall. Which one do you want first?
I don't care.
All right, let's go the off the wall one. So let's say I can give you an all expenses paid trip to any country in the world for a month. You don't have work or a mystery box. What are you taking? The trip or the mystery box?
Mystery box.
Yeah, what are you taking?
Mystery box.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. I like the sense of adventure. Now, my actual intellectual question. Bernie Sanders said he put a bunch of women who were cancer patients on a bus in Vermont and drove them to Canada to get cheaper medical treatments for their, medicine for their cancer. I want to know, what does that mean about sort of like global free market health industry and pharmaceuticals? What do you think about that? Like a move like that? How does that impact someone like you?
Well, it's sort of like economics. I mean, if all of America did that, then everything would move to Canada. Canadian industry, every doctor would have to practice there. They only have so many doctors in Canada, right? So it just makes a lot of sense. Drug companies would refuse to sell products to Canada because they knew that the arbitrage was happening.
So,
Do you think that's a way, like, so the FDA sort of kind of tries to control supply and demand a little bit? Am I wrong in saying that, or no?
Who tried?
The FDA, do you think they try to, like, control supply and demand of certain drugs and medicines and stuff like that by only giving
No,
out?
they don't have that jurisdiction.
Okay, so the natural sort of supply and demand thing is just controlled basically by which nation we live in. The ability to, like, cross a border or something that for medical drugs, do you think that should be easier to do, or do you think we should be kind of continuing to make it more difficult? Because, you know, there are people... Go ahead.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, no.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering because I know, like, you even look... Like that movie Dallas Buyers Club, did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
So you know how, like, in that movie, McConaughey's character or whatever, he goes to all those foreign countries to try to get drugs that aren't legally allowed in the United States to get an alternative way to fight diseases. And I know what you're saying, like, a lot of the way that you raised medicine is so we don't have to rely on a 70-year-old drug to try to cure something. Do you think that this sort of state borders and the way the government regulates the incoming and outcoming of medicine doesn't really let that free market play out? What's your thought on that?
I don't know, bro.
Is that way too much deeper than the...
Oh, damn, he hung up on me. Did I just stump Shkreli? Did I stump the Shkreli?
So there we go. Thank you, Martin Shkreli, for being on the podcast. I said I stumped the Shkreli, and the person that I was at work with was like, no, you were just so boring that you had one of the most charismatic, like, ridiculous people on. I think he said some negative words in there, but I'm not going to say them. They were negative words. He was not a Shkreli fan. And he was like, you had that guy on, and somehow you got him to hang up on you. He didn't really dig into what I was thinking about the way that free market impacts the pharmacy business in the United States. But I bet you he knows, and I'm sure if he researched it, or he probably knows. I know he said he didn't, but I'd be curious to talk to him more. I would love to talk to him more. He also said one other interesting thing, which was basically, and I hope I'm saying it right because I was listening to the live stream a little bit, was that people freaked out about how much he raised the price of the medicine, but other comparable medicines for different drugs, but diseases that were, you know, different, but sort of in the same realm, with the same limited amount of drugs to cure them, were already priced higher than he even brought his drug to. But no one really freaked out about it because it wasn't such a drastic change. So I would love to have Martin on. I hope he listens to this. I tweeted him afterwards, told him I was going to throw it up there and I'd give him the link, so I'll do that. I'd love to have him on for like 15 or 20 minutes and talk to him maybe about how he feels like what is the most misrepresented thing about him, the thing people just don't understand. And I want to do a little bit more research, so maybe if I can get him on, I'll go do some more research and be even more well-informed. But that was Martin Shkreli, live on the podcast, but not live because I did it before the podcast, because I called him 149 times. That's commitment to the Deuce right there. That is commitment to the Deuce. For part 2 today, we have an interview I'm really excited about with one of my great friends and someone who is one of the smartest people I know, Dillon Gilbertson. He's a researcher who does clinical trials right now that have to do with sleep and studies that have to do with sleep. He's really, really interesting, and I've always been fascinated by sleep because I think we do it all the time, and we do it for a third of our lives, and we really don't know a lot about it in terms of how much we should be getting, how it affects our performance day to day, how it completely affects our cognitive abilities, when and how we can sort of sleep at our peak levels, how lights and different things impact our sleeping abilities. And Dillon recently went to a conference where the focus was athletes, highest top tier level athletes, their sleeping abilities and their sleeping patterns and how it impacted their athletic abilities. So I'm going to toss to Dillon right now. It's a great interview. It's really interesting. If you like fitness, if you're outgoing, if you're athletic, this will intrigue you. And also, the science of sleep to me is just fascinating. So enjoy. Hope it doesn't put you to bed. Hi, Dylan. How's it going?
It's going well, Dave. How are you?
Good. It's weird that we've been hanging out for like 30 minutes, but as soon as I turn this on, I have to say hello to you.
Yeah, it's sort of a switch. Now you have to put on a different hat.
I know.
Immediately.
I'm so professional.
We were gunning down alien terrorists in a video game.
Just moments ago. And yet now we turn to something completely different.
Correct.
So we're going to talk about sleep, which I was thinking on the ride over here. It's a little ironic that we're talking about sleep at night right now when you're planning on staying up through the night until like 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning to change your sleep schedule to then conduct scientific processes about people's sleep ability.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time when I first started working at the sleep lab. It's ironic that people who now, like myself, who they're trying to figure out why sleep is important, or trying to figure out why you need sleep, are the very people who are getting the worst sleep. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So the reason we decided to do this is because you went to can I call it a sleep conference, a sleep convention?
That's exactly what it was. It was a sleep convention.
A sleep convention.
It was Comic-Con for people who do sleep.
Yeah.
People were dressed up in pillows.
And it's ironic. Were people actually like...
No.
Oh, my God.
No.
If everyone went in PJs... That's like how Michael Scott would run a sleep convention, is like everyone is forced to wear pajamas to the sleep convention. Or he makes everyone from his office wear pajamas and everyone else is in like suits and business casual attire.
Yeah.
Except for his branch. I would be the guy in a pajama, like a one-piece pajama suit.
Actually, I got in trouble, not for wearing my pajamas, but I actually got in trouble for not wearing khakis or like a button-up shirt. Because the first day of the convention... I told people, I was like, I don't know how to dress. They're like, oh, just dress casual. And I think people really overestimate
what your casual is.
Yeah, 90% of my clothes have holes in them, and so I was wearing a ripped pair of jeans and like a dirty green jacket, and I came downstairs. My boss was like, you need to go change right now. So I had to go up. I only brought one pair of khakis for the entire week for the conference, which is a big mistake because I had to buy a Tide pen and. I had to wash my pants every day with a Tide pen because I spill stuff all over.
So next time you go to a sleep convention, you're going to realize it's a dress-up occasion.
Correct.
Slightly more formal than you would expect for a sleep convention.
Yeah.
My mom always used to say, you got to be clean so you look good for your dreams. So I'm not sure if that applies here, but I feel like there's a loose connection.
You have to have a clean mind to do your dreams.
Yeah, that's long gone. There's no soap that'll get that to happen. So... We're talking about this. So you're obviously athletic performance. You have a background in kinesiology, right? Or what?
It's exercise physiology. So I got my bachelor's degree in health PE. And then I was going to go into physical therapy. Decided I didn't want to do that. So I ended up getting a master's degree in exercise physiology.
Yeah.
Which makes where I am now sort of a weird spot and not expected because sleeping is the exact opposite of exercise.
Yes.
You would think. Mm-hmm. And so it was sort of a weird route how I got here, but here I am.
But here you are. And so, because I know about your background, I know that you've done coaching and tons of sports and were doing powerlifting at one point. Right. So like training and all of that is something that is in your background, athletic training. Yes. And that rolled into that. But now you conduct sleep studies. So you go to the sleep conference. And sleep has always fascinated me because I can sleep like pretty much anywhere, but I also want sleep all the time. I'm not a morning person. Like once I start sleeping, I just don't want to get out of that. But I know we don't know a lot about sleep. I listened to an NPR podcast about sleep, and basically what they said was someone did a study a long time ago, I think it was like the 30s or something, conducted this data and found out 8 hours or so is the right amount or so according to this study, to sleep. But they never really did anything like gender, age-specific, race, ethnicity, like very little about that. But that fact of information just got like spit around and spit around and spit around, where everyone was just like, oh, 8 hours. Like, that's what we're shooting for, 8 hours. And no one really dug into this. And the more they do, we don't really, for something we spend 30% of our lives doing, is it fair to say we know very little?
Probably. I want to say up front that while I do sleep research, I'm still relatively new to the field, and so I'd still looking through a lot of the research that's been done in the past. Like during overnight studies, our boss will often give us past research to read, just so that we're more up to date on the topic and more on the history of the topic. But yeah, I think I also, to my understanding, that was also the case, and it hasn't really changed a whole lot. It's sort of stratified now by age, whereas people or infants or toddlers are supposed to get around like 11 or 12 hours of sleep. 16-year-olds are supposed to get, I think, pretty close to the same, like 6 or 8 to 12 or something like that. Adults are supposed to get between 7 and 9, or 7 and 10, something like that. To my understanding, is where it's at.
Okay, and then this conference, what you found particularly interesting that got you, quote, a new science hero, is the way that sleep has like an impact on athletes, and time zones, and just sort of those two things, the way that they work together to kind of like how athletes are using sleep to make themselves at their best performance abilities.
Right. So the study. So my new science hero, her name is Shkreli Ma. She went to Stanford, and she now works at UC San Francisco.
Okay.
She did a study. She works very closely with the Golden State Warriors as well as the San Jose Sharks. She had gotten a tweet, I think, from Steph Curry at some point. Like she showed it during her presentation, and she's kind of bragging about it, rightfully so. And
this conference was before they lost.
This was before they lost, correct.
I wonder if she's devastated.
Well, it was the same night that the Sharks lost the Stanley Cup, and was just before Golden State had lost.
Okay.
And so maybe there really isn't much to her.
Everything's debunked. We debunked everything that's going to happen after this.
That's actually one of the reasons why she's my science hero as well. We can get into later is how she presents her data. She presents it knowing that there's flaws to it, and knowing that there are ways that can make it better, but also reasons why it's very applicable. That's not really here or there. But the study that she did, I can't remember, it was maybe in 2012, where she had college basketball athletes and looked at the difference between sleep deprivation, normal sleep schedule, and sleep extension is what she called it. And so for sleep restriction, she had them sleep no more than 4 hours, I think, a night. And she did, for baseline, they just had their regular sleep schedule. And then for sleep extension, she had them sleep a minimum of 10 hours a night.
Okay.
Which can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Actually, no, that was a different study. Sorry. So,
it's okay.
So for the basketball study, there was no sleep restriction. It was only baseline, so your normal sleep schedule and sleep extension.
Okay.
And so at the beginning of the season, what they did is they measured 3 different things. They measured sprint speed, which was, I think it's around like 282 feet, where you sprint to half court, back to baseline, and then full court.
Yeah.
I think it's like a modified gasser. We'd call it like a suicide. Right.
Yeah.
So you timed those after every practice. You measured 10 free throws and 10 3-point shots. And then you have your completion percentages and things like that. And then after the extension, so 10 hours of sleep, and they did it for I think they did it for like 4 weeks of sleep extension, and then remeasured all these things and found that the sleep extension, their sprint times were decreased, so they were improved by an average of 0.7 seconds.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're an athlete or if you ever sprinted or know what sprinting times are like, that's a very significant amount to increase your speed by.
Okay.
Free throws and 3-point shots were both increased by 9%.
Just by sleeping.
And it was great because what she also did was she measured their moods and how they felt. And so she did this test called the PALMS test. And it sort of goes through 65 different adjectives, and so you rate like how hostile you feel on a scale of 1 to 5, how tired you feel 1 to 5, and go through all these different things, and sort of also at the same time debunk the idea that as the season goes on, that there's this level of fatigue, and so there's this idea that as the seasons go on in sports, the athletes get more tired, they get more beat up, and they're just not playing at their peak performance anymore. And after sleep extension, they actually felt more energetic and they felt more vigorous or more vigor, rather, as opposed to being more tired.
So
with sleep extension.
Would that mean that you wouldn't want to start the season sleeping 10 hours? You would want to gradually increase your sleep as the season goes on? Or does it mean you just want to extend beyond 8 hours and have like a full 10 hours of sleep to be a high-performing athlete?
That wasn't something that was really dug into a whole lot, but there wasn't a gradual increase in sleep. They just started from baseline and then at one point jumped to sleep extension. So,
and then just went from there.
And so there wasn't a gradual increase to sleep time. And so if you want to try and sort of jump to conclusions on that front, then you could just say, 10 hours of sleep is probably a good amount of sleep to get to gain these benefits.
To be like a high-performance athlete.
Potentially, yes. That's what the data would suggest.
And I know that there's pretty solid documentation of some of the best athletes in the world sleeping like a lot. I know LeBron has said that he sleeps like more than 10 hours a night.
Right.
I know that like Tom Brady sleeps before 9 o'clock like every night. Most nights he's in bed at 8. So like these guys do sleep a ton. J.J. Watt, if you watched Hard Knocks, because he's like the biggest show-off in the world, he had like built a bed inside one of their facilities that was like hidden away from everything else. And so like in between all their two-a-day practices, he would sleep for like an hour and 15 minutes.
It's a secret bed.
And
did the coaches know about that?
Well, they did, but he like tucked it away. He bought this huge bed. And Steve Nash is famous for saying like he trained his body, military status, to literally just sleep wherever he could.
Right.
So anytime he was in like a state of transition or there were downtime, he was grabbing those like 20 to 30 minutes to try to sleep.
Yeah, it's great. So there's some studies, I haven't read them in too great a detail, but there are some studies that are looking to doing power naps as opposed to just extending your, like a marathon of sleep.
It's just about like accumulation.
Doing power naps type of thing. So Shireen Mashi also presented a graph of different athletes in I think the 2011 season, how much self-reported sleep that they got. LeBron James was up there in the top. Tiger Woods was somewhere down near 4 hours of sleep, and 2011 was where he really started to shit the bed.
Because he was taking tons of Ativan and trying to stay, or like whatever, and trying to stay up at night and have weird sex with strippers.
Right, exactly. So that he
was fighting the sleep. She was taking sleep-medicated drugs to stay awake and have weird sex.
She actually made a joke that said the 4 hours of sleep is hours of sleep, not total hours in bed, or else that number would have been much, much higher.
Well played,
Which was a good joke. It got big laughs at the sleep conference.
Yeah.
Everybody loved it.
Because you're all overtired. But go on.
I didn't really have anywhere else to go with that. It was just
Well, so the athletes that were sleeping more, were they typically like higher performance athletes or athletes that were
these were all athletes that were at the top of their game. So she was just presenting specific individuals from every sport that were at the top of their game.
Okay.
Was sort of what it was. Tom Brady, I think, was on there. I don't remember how many hours it was, but it was above the average of like 6 or 7 hours of sleep. There was one specific individual. He plays for the Warriors. I can't remember his name. I'm not huge on basketball. I don't like basketball a lot. Mm-hmm. But I think he's a small forward.
Okay.
For the Warriors. He's Andre
Iguodala.
Yeah. So she worked with him personally to try and help his game out. And so what he said that during his college years and now during his regular years has sort of stuck with it is that he gets very, very poor sleep. He stays up very, very late playing video games up until like 4 a.m., playing video games or doing whatever. And then he'll try and crush like 3 hours of sleep before practice. Then he'll wake up and like try and sneak in like maybe an hour nap at some point. He's got very, very poor sleep hygiene.
Dude, that's the same sleep patterns as my roommate Desmond.
Right.
That's crazy. I don't understand how people can do that, but I don't know exactly what that is. I think there's something culturally about that at times too.
Yeah. So what she did though is, again, so she had him also go on this 10-hour sleep extension just like her college basketball athletes, and it was pretty remarkable that the outcome or the results of this one individual almost perfectly matched the results from the college basketball team, whereas his free throws and his 3 points increased by 9%. His sprint, I don't remember what the sprint was, but it was somewhere around, there's like 0.6 or 0.5 seconds, which is incredible. That was sort of just a testament to the study that she had done prior.
So it's almost like the time spent sleeping could be as valuable as the time spent training. Or maybe not as valuable, but certainly adds significant value.
Sure, yeah.
So it's interesting because what you were saying about him staying up late at night playing video games, I know that LED lighting is like a big thing. They say artificial lighting messes with, and we'll probably transition this to time zones eventually, but artificial lighting messes with your ability to sleep a little bit. And that's why like the new Apple download for the iPhone has a nightshade, like red glare or whatever it is, where they take out the UV lighting. And I put that on a filter on my laptop back in the day. I used to be guilty of the I'm only going to watch one episode of TV in my bed before I fall asleep, and I'd watch 4 on my laptop. Once I put the nightshade on, I became more tired quickly and would go to sleep earlier. I think there's a lot to that, right?
There's a big thing with that. So when we go into the room, so during the night for our sleep studies, a lot of time wires will fall off of the patients. We have to go into the room to fix them, but the room's completely dark, and we're not allowed to bring in regular flashlights because, like you said, artificial lighting will screw with things with your sleep. One of the things has to do with melatonin. Melatonin plays a really big role, and I think artificial light messes with your melatonin levels.
Yeah, which has to do with people I know that have ADHD have melatonin levels that are significantly either higher or lower than your average output.
Something like that.
So it definitely has to do with activity levels.
Right. And so what we have to do instead of using a regular flashlight is we have to go in with a red flashlight. So it's that exact same thing with the red filter on it. I don't know the science behind it, but that just seems to be the deal.
Yeah, so I guess it has something to do with changing your sleep patterns, because I know that was a big thing. People who stay up late and watch TV right before bed are not as successful with their sleep.
Right.
What about, let's talk a little bit about time zones. I
Okay.
know that was a really interesting part of the study that you found out.
Yeah, so Shkreli Ma, I went and spoke with her because I was really excited that I had found this new science here. She'd done all this stuff, and she presented the data in really convincing ways. And so I went up to her to talk to her after her presentation and told her that I was working with, told her who my boss was, and she goes, "Oh, I've done a paper with him on NFL and time zones." And I was like, "That's amazing. That's cool that you know him, and so now we've got this connection. Maybe we could work together in the future." And she got really excited because I'm an exercise physiologist. She knows very little about exercise physiology. I know relatively little about sleep, and that's sort of how we connected. But what that study is they had taken, this was back in 2013, they had taken the past 40 years of data for teams who played, for East Coast versus West Coast teams. When they played each other, and they all had to be games that took place after 8 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay.
Right? And so if you're playing on 8 p.m. Eastern time and you're from the West Coast, you're playing at roughly 5 p.m.
After 5, yeah.
Right. And so when you do that, they found that just based on the time zone, that the West Coast teams traveling to the East Coast could beat the spread. So you're familiar with the spread, more familiar than I am. They take all the data from
Las Vegas does tons of data, net amounts and stuff.
All sorts of stuff on there to see who's going to win the game, by how much, things like that. West Coast could beat the spread roughly 70% of the time, just based on travel direction and the time that they were playing.
Okay, so if you moved over 2 time zones or something, or 3 time zones?
Well, so what they did was, West Coast had to be in the Pacific time zone. East Coast had to be in the Eastern time zone.
So to move all the way over and play a game at 8 p.m. Eastern, which would be 5 p.m. West Coast, the teams traveling west to east were beating the spread significantly.
Correct.
And then what about teams traveling east to west?
So east to west, it was sort of a similar deal in that there was, how was it? So when they traveled east to west, they were playing at...
What would be later times for them?
Right, yeah. So there'd be later times for them. Their biological clocks are still on these much later times.
Mm-hmm.
And so to them, it feels like they're playing at, you know, the game is ending at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, so that gives them a significant disadvantage.
So it's a significant disadvantage. And so, yeah, the time zone itself just seems like it's got a very, very strong effect. And I was talking with my boss about it, and he was like, yeah, if I were a betting man, like I would bet on them every time.
And that
West Coast every time.
And that makes sense. In a series like we just saw between the Cavs and Golden State,
right.
They're traveling on their own time zone so much because both teams are going to both locations back and forth. You wouldn't probably find an advantage like that.
Yeah.
But you would think on the first time traveling that would be a huge, huge thing.
Right.
So what did you take out of it as like obviously a non-professional, but like someone who, like I have found, especially in the last 2 years of my life, no matter how much sleep I get, I never feel completely refreshed. And I know that sounds like if someone is listening and has a kid, they're like, you have no idea what being sleep deprived is. But I think for the last year at least, it feels like no matter how much I sleep, I'm just never like fully awake. I don't know why that is. Maybe I should just do 10 and a half hours.
Try it out.
Just force myself to go to bed like 4 seconds after work and then wake up 30 seconds before work starts and have no life other than sleeping.
Maybe you have undiagnosed sleep apnea.
I don't think that's it.
Just getting poor sleep.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
What did you think about, like, would you make any sleep changes yourself to your own structure?
No.
Like, if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, I mean, I like to do, like, I work out and on the weekends maybe I'll do something, but not like a high-level athlete. Should I be getting more or less sleep than, like, the 8 hours that I get?
Well, I feel like right now, based on my knowledge and based on the research that I've seen, that it's always just if you can get more sleep, do it.
Yeah.
If you're going to be an athlete, sleep is extremely important, and there's more and more data coming out now that's going to show that. I don't really have any other advice. That maybe just get a little
to do someone else.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, with someone like Andre Iguodala,
yeah,
he was able to be tested on like these baseline drills and something like that.
Yeah.
I wonder what type of things. There's got to be like cognitive abilities. I'm sure you could test a regular person on based on the amount of levels they slept.
So, you mean how much sleep will affect their cognitive abilities?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing?
Yeah.
So they do a psychomotor vigilance test, which is basically like a lot of times it's a test. So what we used to do when I did exercise studies in the heat is that we do a psychomotor vigilance test, and we'd have them put on thick gloves, and we'd have them put bolts through a hole and try and screw on the bolts and do it as fast as they could.
Okay.
And, the more you're in the heat, the worse you are at it, the slower you are at it. And it's sort of the same thing with sleep. The less sleep you get, the more difficult it is to do it.
And then you could figure out, like, oh, once I get over 8 hours of sleep, then the impact is negligible, so, like, maybe I don't need that much more. I think of it as, like, shuffling a card deck. They say once you shuffle more than 7 times, the randomness factor is so much smaller that it becomes negligible.
Sure.
It's like once you sleep beyond a certain impact level, maybe you're just reaching a level where it's like, oh, I hit this threshold, now I'm peaking.
That could very well be. I don't think anybody really knows that.
I got to find my peak.
Yeah.
That's what this is
Find
all
your
about.
peak.
This is really just about me finding my
that's
peak.
fair. That's fair enough. One of the things that really interests me in this is that a lot of my work, when I worked with exercise in different environmental conditions, is that there's this idea that exercise tolerance is governed, one, by how well your muscles can physically contract and work. And so at some point, like, your muscles just say, we physically can't do this anymore. And how much of fatigue is that versus your brain just stopping signals to your legs saying, stuff's going wrong in our legs, we're going to stop sending signals down there. And so you're not going to, so no matter how hard you try, the brain's not going to send signals because it knows that it's going to stop, or that something's going to go wrong.
That's like a marathon runner when all of a sudden their legs just like stop moving and they're like, there's nothing they can physically do.
Well, that's a lot of that's probably peripheral fatigue is what they call it, or like leg fatigue or muscular fatigue.
Yeah.
And so I tried to test a bunch of different things. So if you exercise in the heat, that creates a more so everything in your body is built to protect your brain for the most part. And so if you're in the heat, if your brain starts to get too hot, I tried to test if that was going to create more. It's called central fatigue, which is basically your brain telling your body to stop, or else things are going to go bad. Tried to see if there was more central fatigue versus more muscular fatigue during exercise.
Okay.
And so I'm really interested now what Shkreli's presentation got me thinking about was, could sleep be the same thing? So if you're very, very low on sleep, your brain's trying to function as hard as it can, and if it can't really function itself and do its own like thinking processes, then like why would it want to exercise? Why would it allow you to continue to use resources on your muscles when it's trying to hoard all the resources it can just to function itself?
So that's a brilliant point. I've read the beginning of a book, which I'm not an expert on, but I'm currently reading it, called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is by this guy named Daniel Kahneman. I think it was Business Book of the Year a couple years ago. But I know that some of the studies that they talk about in the book is that your brain is like any other muscle in your body, where you basically have to work it out in certain circumstances, in particular like with discipline or mental toughness. Those are literal things that you can kind of work on. So the example it gave is like, if you just went out today and you're not a runner and you run 12 miles, you might be able to do it, but then the next day you'd have a really difficult time doing it for recovery, right? And if you try to run 20 miles, you might not be able to. But if you run every day and sort of build up your ability, your longevity, your muscular capacity, then you have more longevity, a better ability to run for a longer distance, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same with making positive choices with your brain and making positive mental choices, rewarding yourself for those mental choices. You get better at saying like, oh, I'm better at eating this. I'm better at eating right when I sleep more because I have more mental capacity, more mental energy because my brain isn't spending so much energy just doing the basic functions it would be doing.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's kind of like a stretch analogy, the way that I think I put that together.
Right.
But basically the idea is if you think of like a power meter like in a video game, you only have so much energy that your brain can use on something. So when you're sleeping well, everything else is easier because that meter is filled all the way up, that it's a lot easier to pick the salad over the French fries.
Yeah.
But when you're hungover and you didn't sleep that well and your body is fatigued and your brain is doing the best it can to keep everything going, a choice like that, you just don't take the mental energy sometimes to make the disciplined choice. It takes more energy. You kind of just like sap out to the crappier choice, even though you know it's bad for you because it's just like the one that's easier.
Right.
The fast food is like easier than preparing the salad or easier than doing whatever.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of what you're saying maybe a little bit too. That your brain has like a certain threshold, and if you don't sleep, you might not be able to push your body parts as long.
In sort of a very adjacent way, yes, it's sort of the same thing. Yeah. That's
crazy.
Yeah.
So what currently are you studying? Like when you go into your sleep study tomorrow?
So right now, a lot of what I'm doing is just working as a sleep tech for various different studies because they're still trying to get me trained on how to read all the data that comes out of when we hook all the wires to these people's heads. Like what comes out of all these wires is very, very odd looking data. It's basically just like a bunch of squiggly lines if you just look
like an EKG or something?
It's much more complicated, much more chaotic than an EKG.
Okay, gotcha.
And so they're trying to train me on how to differentiate between stage 1 versus stage 2 versus REM sleep and all these different states of sleep. And so there's a bunch of different ones testing melatonin levels like we were talking about earlier. A lot of it is obstructive sleep apnea geared. So they're testing different therapies to see which can alleviate obstructive sleep apnea the best. It's just sort of stuff like that.
Gotcha. The one thing that fascinated me with NPR study on sleep, which they basically had all these experts, was the screens, but also the big thing was they were like, no one has really looked at sleep from like a racial and sort of ethnic origin background.
Yeah.
And they did a bunch of like sample survey data, which is obviously like not as good as data that you would get in a laboratory because you're requiring on people's memory and their honesty and all those factors. But I remember they found like significantly less sleep for African Americans males as opposed to like most other age and or gender and ethnicity groups in the country.
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure out if that's just like a cultural commonplace, if that's something that's like based on heritage, or if that's because that's genetically something that an African American male maybe doesn't need the same amount of sleep to function as someone of a different ethnicity and origin.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy to think about, but so many other studies we have, so much other data we have is broken down by like race, ethnicity, age, gender, all of that stuff, but sleep seems to not really be broken down in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. There was a time, and I always feel really weird talking about it because I almost feel like it's racist almost to differentiate between races if you're talking about this kind of stuff.
Well, step one to not being racist is alluding to the fact that you're uncomfortable with the area, so you accomplish that.
I guess that. All right, thanks.
Check that box.
Nailed it.
Now go on scientifically.
But there's a lot of data that says that African Americans tend to, so in your generally there's two different types of muscles in your body. There's fast twitch and slow twitch.
Gotcha.
And you can break those up into different subsets, but generally there's fast twitch and slow twitch. Slow twitch are like
the Tom Brady muscles.
I don't think so.
He said I don't have a fast twitch muscle in my body.
He's dumb.
I know.
Tom Brady's an idiot.
I think it was a joke, but we'll roll with it.
So the slow twitch ones are ones that you use for longevity, not longevity, but for marathons or long distance things. And so the muscles that you use to walk are slow twitch muscles because they're muscles you use for a very, very long time. They operate mostly on fats. And so your body has an almost unlimited store of fat. Even if you're relatively skinny, your muscles can use all the fat at once.
Gotcha.
Fast twitch muscles they use mostly sugar. Your body has a very finite store of sugar, but those are what you use for strength, and so very, very strong, like jumping, running, sprinting, weightlifting, things like that. Those are fast twitch muscles.
Okay.
And that African Americans, they tend to have a much higher concentration of fast twitch muscle fibers.
Okay.
And so I don't remember where we were going with that.
But that's true.
All right, so that's where it was. So your sleep, a lot of what your sleep does is it helps you rest and you can restore and sort of repair things like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using slow twitch muscle fibers, if it's operating mostly on fats, there's a little bit less that it needs to help restore.
Like during sleep.
So, but if you're sprinting or if you're using a lot of these fast twitch muscle fibers, you're depleting your glycogen stores, and then when you go to sleep or you eat, like you can then restore these things that are very vital. Your brain works primarily on sugar,
Mm-hmm.
and so if you're using a bunch of sugar during sprinting or running or whatever it is, you need to restore those to help, for your body to function
by
together.
sleeping or eating.
And so you can sort of see there that if you have a higher concentration of fast twitch muscle fibers, you're using more glucose that you may or may not. I mean, we're sort of stretching and sort of jumping to conclusions a little bit, but you can see how you need a little bit more sleep to help you restore these, so you can, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. I think that's why, because we're like genetically different based on our ages and our gender and our origin, I'm surprised we haven't applied what you regain from sleep to those specific fields.
Yeah.
I think that's the information that I want that data to go in. Because personally, I'm sick of the did you get your 8 hours? And I feel a lot worse when I didn't get my 8 hours. Like last night I got 6.5, maybe close to 7.
Right.
And I definitely felt it when I was going into work today. At the beginning of the day, I was like, I'm going to have to push everything in my body to be able to mentally function the way that I want to.
Right.
Whereas if I sleep 8 plus, it's easier for me to do it. But I'm never really oh, this is where I'm peaking. Here, I made it today. Sometimes I'll sleep a bunch of hours and then feel bad that I wasted a bunch of the day and I'm not rocking the energy. So somebody has to do, no one thinks about just the white male in his mid-20s. That's what I think really needs to be at the forefront. How much should the white male in his mid-20s sleep? That's really what we need to know.
Good God.
Well, I'm glad you got a new hero.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm currently emailing with her to try and get some kind of collaboration together.
Yeah.
The issue is that I don't know what would warrant a collaboration between universities. I don't know what her lab has that our lab wouldn't have, or why we would need to collaborate.
Yeah.
But I really want to do it.
You're just like, I'm Dillon, and like, I just want to be part of this.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
just give me a lab coat. We'll get more pairs of khakis, and I'll go wherever I have to go.
Exactly.
Well, that'll be cool. Well, if that ever comes to fruition, I'll be excited to hear about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it. I'm very excited for it.
Cool. Well, I think we're done. Thank you for enlightening me in the fact that I need to just sleep more and do less of everything else.
You can sleep to win now. The early bird gets the worm, but if you sleep late, you fucking win.
So before this conversation, I'd given up my professional athletic career because I was no longer really working out or training at all for any professional activity that would be athletic. But what I'm going to do is sleep to excess for the next 2 years. And I'm declaring right now my eligibility for the 2019 draft, NFL draft. Based solely on sleep. I'll be our guinea pig project. I won't do any other physical activities. Solely on sleep. I'm going to be draft eligible 2019. So we're back in. The dream is alive.
The dream is alive.
All right, that's it. Thank you, Dillon.
Yeah, thanks.
And that's it for this edition of The Morning Deuce, brought to you by #trending.com. #tell your hot friends. Follow me at dspin4, that's a number, for the win, or #trenders. Talk to you guys soon. See you on Monday.